You never really expect betrayal to come wrapped in the person you trust most. It doesn't announce itself with sirens or warnings. It happens in the silence, when your guard is down, when your soul is most vulnerable. For Emily Carter, it came, on a sterile hospital bed, with the steady beeping of monitors overhead and the sharp, antiseptic air filling her lungs. She had only closed her eyes for what felt like a second. Just a short surgery, they told her. A standard procedure for appendicitis complications, nothing to worry about. Yet when she woke up, half her world had already vanished without a whisper, and the other half was about to burn. She remembered the feeling even now, that sudden, unnatural coldness in her chest. Not from the IV dripping into her veins or the lingering anesthesia, but from the blank screen of her phone that stared back at her. One text message, one single chilling text. No greetings, no compassion. Just a cold screenshot of their shared savings account, $0, and a short sentence from the man she had called her husband for 12 years. I deserve this. Goodbye. Ryan Carter, the man who once promised to protect her from the world, had become the storm that shattered it. And the worst part? Emily wasn't even surprised. Deep down, some dark corner of her heart had already known for a long time. But knowing something in your bones and seeing the brutal proof splashed across a screen are two very different things. One punches you in the gut. The other carves a hollow space where hope used to live. If you want to hear how Emily didn't just survive, but outsmarted and outplayed a betrayal that should have broken her, stay with us. Because this story only gets darker and the revenge only gets sweeter. Before we dive deeper, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to support us in bringing you more unbelievable real-life stories like this one. Your support keeps us going, and sharing these powerful tales that need to be heard. Emily Carter, 42, was a woman of simple dreams and quiet strength. She had built a life she thought was steady. Teaching 3rd grade at a small but thriving elementary school in Boulder, Colorado, Emily had never craved extravagance. She loved sunlit classrooms, the crayon-bright artwork of her students, the cozy Friday nights curled up on the couch with Ryan, their golden retriever, Max, snoring between them. But somewhere along the way, the colors had started to fade. Ryan was once the charming, adventurous man she fell for, a freelance photographer who traveled often, capturing weddings, nature, and portraits across the country. He was magnetic, confident, and made Emily feel like the center of the universe. Until, slowly, that universe began shrinking. First, it was the late nights editing photos, then the business trips that stretched longer than usual. The phone. Calls that used to last hours dwindled to rushed 5-minute check-ins. The I love yous grew mechanical, habitual, something he said while his eyes stayed glued to his glowing screen. And Emily, being Emily, had chosen faith over fear, love over suspicion, trust over evidence, until the hospital. While her body battled a stubborn infection, Ryan had been battling something else entirely. The urge to escape a life he no longer wanted. And he didn't just leave Emily emotionally. He gutted her financially too. Every cent they had saved for their future, their nest egg, their security blanket, siphoned out into accounts she never even knew existed. It was not an impulsive act. No. Ryan's betrayal had been a long, methodical process, crafted in shadows. The betrayal had roots that stretched back months, maybe years, right under Emily's nose while she baked casseroles, graded papers, and dreamed of summer road, trips they would never take. Lying there in the too-bright hospital room, Emily felt the burn of tears she refused to shed. She realized the man she had trusted with her life hadn't just stolen her money. He had stolen the version of her that believed she was safe. The nurses said she needed rest, but sleep wouldn't come. Not with the weight of betrayal pressing down, like a second illness. Instead, she lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling tiles, retracing the steps that led her here. Every forgotten birthday, every missed call, every vague excuse about needing space. The picture formed with agonizing clarity. Ryan hadn't just fallen out of love. He had plotted his exit with surgical precision. And he had chosen the exact moment when she was most defenseless to strike. Cowardice in its purest form. But what Ryan didn't know, what he had wildly underestimated, was that Emily was no victim. Not for long. Somewhere between the quiet hum of the hospital machines and the echo of Ryan's betrayal, something within Emily shifted. She wasn't going to beg. She wasn't going to cry. She wasn't even going to confront him, at least not yet. No, Emily decided to play a longer game, a smarter game, a game where she would be 3 steps ahead. The first step was survival, not just physical, but emotional. She needed to get out of the hospital, get out of Boulder, and disappear from Ryan's radar, just for a little while. Give him enough rope to hang himself with. The second step would be discovery. She would find out exactly how deep Ryan's betrayal ran, where he moved the money, who he moved it with. And the third step? Retribution. Not messy, screaming, sobbing revenge. No. Emily wanted something colder. Cleaner. She wanted justice dressed in dignity. She would reclaim not just her money, but her pride. Her future. As the morning sun stretched long fingers across the hospital floor, Emily felt the fire inside her grow. She texted her cousin Sophie, someone she hadn't spoken to deeply in years, but who she knew would understand. Without judgment. Need a place to stay. Can't explain yet. The reply came almost instantly. Come to Austin. Stay as long as you need. Emily closed her eyes, feeling the first real peace she'd felt in days. She had a place to start. She had a plan. And above all, she had something Ryan never imagined she would find again. Her power. Betrayal hurts. It wounds. It carves you into pieces you don't recognize. But if you are brave, if you are willing to bleed a little longer, it can also be the fire that forges you into something new, something stronger. Emily Carter was about to show Ryan Carter exactly what happens when you bet against the wrong woman. And this story, it's only just beginning. Small quiz for engagement. Who do you think will ultimately pay the higher price in this story? A. Ryan, because betrayal always catches up. B. Emily, because starting over is harder than it seems. Comment your answer below. A or B, and tell us why. We love reading your thoughts. Austin welcomed Emily with a humid, sticky embrace, the kind that clung to your skin and reminded you with every breath that you were far, far from home. The city buzzed around, her, alive and restless, but inside she was an island of stillness. Her soul was too bruised for the chaos. She barely noticed the music pouring out of bars on 6th Street, or the way college students tumbled down the sidewalks laughing in clusters. Emily wasn't here to heal, not yet. She was here to disappear, to think, to plan. Her cousin Sophie's house sat tucked in a sleepy suburban neighborhood, with towering oaks bending overhead and the faint sound of sprinklers clicking in the distance. It was modest, a little worn around the edges, but it had something Emily hadn't felt in weeks: safety. Sophie didn't ask questions when Emily arrived, duffel bag slung over one shoulder, hospital bracelet still clinging to her wrist. She only opened the door, pulled her into a fierce hug, and whispered, "Whatever it is, we'll figure it out." Those words cracked something in Emily. She didn't cry, not fully, but her shoulders sagged, and the weight she'd been carrying, alone for days, shifted, even if just slightly, onto someone else's back. That first night, Emily couldn't sleep. She lay awake in the guest bedroom, listening to the cicadas whine outside the window, feeling the unfamiliar ceiling fan stir the warm air. Her mind was a battleground, memories and plans clashing in a violent, endless loop. Ryan had stolen from her, lied to her, left her. That much was clear. But Emily didn't believe for a second that the story ended with a drained bank account and a callous text message. Men like Ryan didn't just cut and run clean. They left trails. Tiny, careless mistakes hidden in the shadows, waiting for someone patient enough, angry enough, to find them. And Emily Carter had never been more patient or more angry in her life. At sunrise, she rose from bed, dressed in jeans and a plain t-shirt, and brewed a pot of coffee so strong it practically bit her tongue. She opened her laptop and logged into the joint accounts she and Ryan once shared. It was worse than she imagined. Not only had Ryan cleaned out their main savings, but several smaller transfers had been happening for months. Small enough not to raise alarm, large enough to matter when stacked together. Some to a new account under Ryan's name, some to a PayPal account Emily hadn't known he even had. And then there were the charges. Hotel bookings in cities Ryan had no business visiting. Expensive jewelry purchases from boutiques in Miami. Dinner reservations under his name at restaurants Emily had only seen in magazines. Thousands of dollars funneled out of their lives, transformed into a life Emily had no part of. Rage simmered low in her chest, but she refused to let it boil over. Anger was dangerous if it wasn't directed. She needed to stay sharp, focused. Sophie's friend, Leah, a tech-savvy freelance investigator, came over that afternoon. Emily had hesitated at first. Dragging strangers into her private hell didn't appeal to her. But Leah was discreet, professional, and above all, understanding. She didn't blink when Emily laid out the bare bones of the betrayal. "You're not crazy," Leah said simply, peering over her glasses at the screen. "And you're not alone." With Leah's help, Emily dug deeper. Bank accounts Ryan had tried to hide. A secret P.O. box rented in Miami. Flights booked under aliases. And one name that appeared again and again. Isabella. Isabella Torres. 28 years old. An Instagram influencer with glossy, sun-kissed hair and a smile too wide to be entirely real. Emily stared at the screen, at the photos of Isabella lounging in expensive hotel rooms, sipping champagne on yachts, posing in designer clothes. So this was the woman who had replaced a lifetime of loyalty and sacrifice. Emily felt no anger toward Isabella. Not yet. That emotion was reserved for Ryan, the man who had made 1,000 tiny choices that led here, who had watched Emily pour herself into building a future while he constructed an escape plan behind her back. The betrayal was bad enough. The insult of it all, that he thought she wouldn't fight back, that he thought she would crumble and disappear, was worse. Over the next few days, Emily built a fortress of information. She created a binder, old school, page after page of printed statements, screenshots, emails, flight itineraries, hotel bookings. She color-coded everything, mapped it out like the world's most devastating school project. Every morning she would brew her bitter coffee, pull her hair into a tight ponytail, and sit at Sophie's kitchen table piecing together the puzzle of Ryan Carter's secret life. Every evening, she would walk around the quiet streets, letting her mind breathe, imagining the future she would build once this was over. Not the future she had planned with Ryan, but something different. Something hers alone. One night, after particularly strong coffee and even stronger memories, Emily stumbled across something that made her heart pound. A lease agreement. Ryan had co-signed an apartment for Isabella, a gleaming high-rise in downtown Miami, the kind that cost more for a month's rent than Emily earned in 2. And it had been signed while Emily was still in the hospital. The betrayal wasn't an accident. It wasn't a mistake. It was premeditated. Planned. Heartless. She sat back in her chair, staring at the evidence. Her hands shook, but not from fear, From clarity, Ryan wasn't just selfish, he was cruel. And cruelty demanded consequences. The next morning, Emily found a local attorney in Austin, a recommendation from Leah. Daniel Brooks was sharp-eyed and sharp-witted, and within 5 minutes of hearing Emily's story, he leaned forward with a small, dangerous smile. "You have more power than you think," he said. He explained that because Emily had refinanced the house in Boulder solely under her name 2 years ago, back when she had better credit, Ryan technically had no ownership rights. It was hers. Untouchable. As for the money Ryan had siphoned, there were laws, marital misconduct, fraud, financial abuse. And Emily had something many women in her position didn't: evidence. Cold, hard, irrefutable proof. Daniel laid out a plan. They would file legal complaints strategically, force Ryan into a corner, make it clear he wasn't just facing a divorce, he was facing serious legal consequences. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about dignity. It was about drawing a line in the sand and saying, "You will not erase me. You will not walk away clean." That night, Emily sat on Sophie's back porch, watching the stars blink overhead. She thought about everything she had lost, everything she was about to fight for. She didn't feel broken. She didn't even feel bitter. She felt ready. Ryan Carter had mistaken her silence for weakness. He thought disappearing with their money and his Instagram princess would leave Emily powerless, voiceless. But Emily Carter had learned something in those quiet hours, in those sleepless nights. Revenge wasn't loud. It wasn't screaming or slashing tires or drunken confrontations. It was methodical. It was patient. It was cold and calculating and delivered with a calm smile across a courtroom. She would let Ryan run. Let him believe he had won. Because the higher he climbed on his illusion of victory, the harder he would fall. And Emily? She would be there to watch him hit the ground. The silent war had begun, and she was just getting started. The true strength of a battle often lies not in the force of the first strike, but in the silence before it. In the moments when nothing seems to happen, when the enemy grows complacent, convinced the storm has passed. That was the silence Emily Carter mastered. Austin became her staging ground. While Ryan cavorted on yachts and posed for social media smiles he didn't earn, Emily sat quietly with Daniel Brooks at his downtown office, forging her next moves with the same methodical patience Ryan had once used to betray her. Only this time, it wouldn't end in devastation. It would end in reckoning. Daniel listened more than he spoke, tapping his pen softly against a yellow notepad as Emily laid out every detail she had unearthed. When she finished, there was a moment of heavy silence. Then Daniel smiled, a slow, sharp smile that did not reach his eyes. "You have him boxed in," he said, "and he doesn't even know it." Together, they built a strategy not from anger, but from precision. Daniel explained that Ryan's removal of their funds could be categorized under financial fraud, particularly given Emily's medical incapacitation at the time, a vulnerability that courts took seriously. Furthermore, because Emily had maintained sole ownership of the Boulder house, any attempts Ryan might make to claim it would fall flat. It was time to tighten the net. Daniel advised Emily to move carefully. No explosive confrontations, no warning shots. Let Ryan continue believing he was safe. Every text he sent, every careless post Isabella made online, it would all become part of a growing mountain of evidence that would bury him. But there was more Emily could do beyond legal maneuvers. In quiet moments, Emily began to reclaim her power through action. She reached out to a few trusted connections, an old friend in Denver who worked in real estate law, a former colleague who had moved into cybersecurity, weaving together a small network of allies who could help her stay several steps ahead. One afternoon, as the cicadas hummed loudly outside Sophie's kitchen window, Leah, her tech-savvy investigator, called with another piece of the puzzle. "There's movement," Leah said. Ryan started moving small amounts of money into new accounts. Looks like he's trying to liquidate quietly. Emily's stomach tightened, but she forced herself to breathe slowly. She had expected this. Ryan was trying to cover his tracks, unaware that the ground beneath him had already cracked. "There's more," Leah added. "One of the new accounts? Isabella's name is attached. Joint access." Emily felt the sharp sting of betrayal all over again. But this time it didn't paralyze her. It focused her. "He's not just planning a new life," Emily said slowly. "He's building it right now. Every transfer, every transaction." It was more evidence, more ammunition. Ryan's attempt to erase his past was only weaving a tighter noose around his future. Meanwhile, Emily started putting her house in order, literally and figuratively. She filed paperwork to reinforce her sole ownership of the Boulder house. She worked with Daniel to freeze her remaining credit lines, ensuring Ryan couldn't siphon off anything else. She transferred her modest retirement savings into a secured account only she could access. Each small act, each line of paperwork, was a thread in the web she was spinning around the man who had once thought he held all the power. Daniel prepared the initial filings, a civil complaint alleging financial misconduct and fraud, a petition to formally initiate divorce proceedings under grounds that would heavily favor Emily. The documents were thick, detailed, ruthless. As they reviewed the paperwork together late one Friday evening, Daniel leaned back in his chair and regarded her thoughtfully. "You know," he said, "most people in your position come in broken, angry, desperate. But you—" He shook his head, half in admiration, half in disbelief. "You're surgical." Emily smiled for the first time in days, a small, cold smile she barely recognized as her own. "I guess betrayal teaches you things about yourself," she said softly. "Things you might never have wanted to know. But once you do, you can't unknow them. In another world, another life, she might have mourned that realization. Now, she embraced it. There were moments, of course, when the memories tried to break through. When she thought about the nights spent curled up next to Ryan, dreaming about growing old together. When she remembered lazy Sunday mornings, pancakes on the stove, Max chasing tennis balls across the yard. The weight of what she had lost could have crushed her, could have made her small and bitter and broken. But Emily refused. She wasn't erasing those memories. She was repurposing them, fueling herself with every laugh that had become a lie, every promise that had shattered in silence. They were no longer anchors. They were wings. A week after finalizing the first round of filings, Daniel gave her the green light to make her next move. Emily, now a master of quiet warfare, crafted a polite but ice-cold email to Ryan. The message was simple. "Ryan, I am aware of the financial transactions and the breach of trust. I have retained legal counsel. Please direct any future communication through my attorney, Daniel Brooks. I wish you the best in your future endeavors." Emily, there was no anger in the words, no accusation, just cold, calm finality. It was the kind of letter that didn't beg or plead. It warned. Emily sent it late at night, then turned off her phone, closed her laptop, and walked out into the Austin night. She stood barefoot in Sophie's backyard, feeling the cool grass beneath her feet, staring up at a sky dusted with stars. She wasn't scared anymore. She wasn't broken. She was waiting. The next morning, the storm came. Ryan called, 6 missed calls before noon. Then a barrage of texts, oscillating between confusion, fury, and thinly veiled threats. How dare she accuse him? How could she be so cold? Didn't she understand he had been under pressure? Didn't she realize he had been forced to make choices she couldn't possibly understand? Emily ignored every word. Each angry ping of her phone was another brick in the wall she was building between them, a wall Ryan would never climb. When direct confrontation failed, Ryan shifted tactics. Publicly, He began painting himself as the victim, cryptic posts on Facebook about betrayal, subtle jabs on Instagram about being blindsided. Emily watched it unfold with detached amusement. She knew the truth, and soon, so would everyone else. She and Daniel filed the complaints formally. They requested a temporary restraining order to prevent Ryan from selling or transferring any joint property. They froze all known joint accounts. They scheduled a court hearing in Denver, the city where it had all begun. It was almost poetic. While Ryan fumbled in the dark, trying to guess at her next move, Emily was already miles ahead, setting traps he couldn't even see, every legal motion. Every secured asset, every piece of evidence filed quietly but forcefully into the court system. This was not a messy brawl. It was a chess game, and Emily Carter had already maneuvered her way into checkmate. As she sat in Daniel's office the night before the court hearing, flipping through a final stack of documentation, Emily felt a strange, unfamiliar emotion stirring in her chest. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't even anger anymore. It was something cleaner, something sharper. Vindication. Ryan Carter had thought he could erase her with a few clever transfers, a few glossy photos, and a new girl half his age. He had forgotten that the strongest storms are the ones you never see coming. And Emily Carter, quiet, steady, broken open Emily, was about to remind him just how devastating a storm could be. Tomorrow, the trap would snap shut, and Ryan would finally learn what it felt like to lose everything, just like he had taught her. The morning of the hearing arrived with a sky the color of old bruises, heavy with the promise of rain. Emily Carter stood before the mirror in Sophie's guest room, fastening a simple silver chain around her neck, her fingers steady despite the storm brewing both outside and within. She wore a navy dress, modest, strong, and a pair of low black heels that clicked authoritatively against the floor. Today was not about appearances. Today was about truth. Daniel met her outside the courthouse in Denver, rain misting down, around them as they stood for a moment in silence, gathering themselves. It was strange, Emily thought, how the familiar city skyline no longer felt like home. Boulder and Denver had once been the backdrops to her life. Date nights, job interviews, lazy weekend trips. Now they were battlefields. Memory and betrayal, stitched into every concrete corner. "You ready?" Daniel asked, his voice low. Emily nodded once, sharply. She didn't trust herself to speak. Inside, the courthouse buzzed with a low electric energy. Lawyers clutched thick folders. Nervous plaintiffs shifted in their seats. Judges swept past in flowing robes, stern and purposeful. But Emily moved like a blade through the chaos, focused, sharp, cutting. Ryan Carter sat at the defense table, leaning back with an affected nonchalance that only highlighted the panic simmering beneath his carefully curated surface. His lawyer, a sleek, expensively dressed woman named Veronica Tate, whispered fiercely in his ear as Emily entered. He glanced up, just once, and Emily caught the flicker in his eyes. Not anger, not even hatred. Fear. Good, she thought. Let him feel it. The hearing began with formalities, the heavy machinery of the legal system grinding into motion. But Emily barely heard the clerk's monotone announcements or the judge's polite greetings. Her entire being narrowed to a single point of focus, making sure her voice, her truth, was heard. Daniel opened their case methodically, with a quiet, devastating precision that left no room for doubt. He presented the timeline. Emily's hospitalization, her medical incapacitation, the sudden withdrawal of all shared funds by Ryan within hours of her surgery. He laid bare the pattern, the siphoning of money, the secret accounts, the hotel receipts, the luxury purchases. The co-signed lease for Isabella Torres, complete with dates that overlapped neatly with Emily's stay in the hospital. Each piece of evidence landed like a hammer blow, shattering the fragile story Ryan's lawyer tried to spin about, mutual misunderstandings and complex marital dynamics. At one point, Veronica objected loudly, claiming Daniel was mischaracterizing Ryan's actions. The judge, a woman with sharp cheekbones and sharper eyes, overruled her without hesitation. Emily sat still, her hands folded neatly in her lap as emails were read aloud. Emails Ryan had carelessly sent to Isabella, bragging about his plans to finally be free, to start over fresh with our money. There it was, plain and undeniable. Not desperation, not a mistake. Premeditation. When it was Ryan's turn to speak, his facade cracked within minutes. He fidgeted in his seat, his voice sliding between defensiveness and wounded indignation. He painted himself as the victim of a loveless marriage, a man pushed to extremes by years of neglect. Emily listened without flinching. She didn't rise to the bait. She didn't even look at him directly. She simply let the silence around his lies grow louder, heavier, until even Ryan seemed to drown in it. Finally, the judge leaned forward, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice slicing through the courtroom. "The evidence presented today indicates not only financial misconduct, but a deliberate and egregious violation of trust during a period when your spouse was medically incapacitated. Do you deny withdrawing the entirety of the shared savings without consent?" Ryan hesitated, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. I didn't think she'd care," he mumbled. A silence followed so complete it seemed the entire courthouse held its breath. The judge's face hardened. "I find it difficult to believe that a man of your age and intelligence could mistake theft for an act of mutual consent," she said, "particularly given the volume and nature of the transactions." She turned to Emily, her expression softening slightly. "Ms. Carter, you have demonstrated a level of composure and diligence this court rarely sees. Given the overwhelming evidence, I am granting your petition." The gavel came down with a satisfying finality. The ruling was devastating for Ryan. The judge froze the hidden accounts, ordered him to return 90% of the stolen funds within 30 days, and awarded Emily sole ownership of the Boulder house. Further, Ryan was responsible for all legal fees incurred by Emily during the proceedings. The divorce would proceed under grounds of financial misconduct, heavily favoring Emily in the final settlement. It was a total, crushing defeat. Ryan sat slumped in his chair, the blood draining from his face. His lawyer whispered frantically, but he barely seemed to hear her. Emily watched him, not with hatred, not even with satisfaction, but with a kind of quiet sadness. He had done all of this to himself. After the judge dismissed the court, Emily rose smoothly and gathered her things. She didn't glance at Ryan as she passed. She didn't need to. The battle was over. The war was won. Outside, the rain had begun to fall in earnest, washing the streets clean. Emily and Daniel stood beneath the overhang of the courthouse entrance, papers tucked safely under Daniel's arm. "You did it," he said simply. "No," Emily said, looking out at the rain. "I survived it. There was a difference." They parted ways with a firm handshake. Emily walked slowly to her car, letting the rain soak into her hair, her clothes, cleansing her in a way she hadn't realized she needed. She drove back to Sophie's house in silence, the wipers swishing back and forth, the road a blur beneath her tires. That night, curled up on Sophie's worn couch with Max resting his head in her lap, Emily allowed herself a rare luxury. She cried, not because she regretted anything, but because she finally could. The tears were not bitter. They were not broken. They were a release. She cried for the woman she had been, the woman who had believed in Ryan Carter's promises, the woman who had trusted too blindly, loved too fiercely, expected too little in return. She cried for the nights spent worrying where he was, The mornings spent pretending she wasn't lonely. The years spent shrinking herself to fit into the hollow space he left behind. And when the tears dried, she felt lighter, clearer. Tomorrow she would begin the work of rebuilding, not out of revenge, not out of anger, but out of the simple, stubborn belief that she deserved a life better than the one she had been handed. Ryan Carter had stolen her money, her trust, her illusions, but he hadn't stolen her future. Emily Carter was still here, and she was just getting started. The house in Boulder sat in silence for 2 more months after the court's ruling, its empty rooms echoing with a past Emily no longer belonged to. She packed her things quietly, methodically, boxing up not just belongings, but memories. The wedding album went into a dusty carton without ceremony. The photos of trips she once thought marked milestones in a happy life now felt like artifacts from a story that had never truly been hers. She didn't linger. She didn't walk through each room for nostalgia's sake. She didn't trace her fingers along the doorframes or stare out the kitchen window trying to summon feelings that had long since rotted away. Emily moved with the quiet purpose of a woman who had already said her goodbyes where it mattered most, in her heart. The day the for sale sign was hammered into the front lawn, she didn't cry. She stood at the curb, the late afternoon sun spilling gold across the neighborhood, and she let the sight wash over her like a chapter finally closing. Boulder would always be a part of her, just not in the way she had once imagined. It was no longer the place where her dreams had died. It was the place where she had been reborn. The house sold quickly. The market was good, and the property had been well kept. A young couple with a toddler on the way bought it, their faces bright with hope and possibility. Emily wished them well, silently, and meant it. Let them fill those rooms with laughter she had long stopped hearing. With the proceeds from the sale, Emily bought a modest home in Sedona, Arizona, a place where the red rocks burned against the horizon and the sky stretched wide and endless. It wasn't a house built for 2. It wasn't filled with the expectation of anyone else's dreams but hers. It was small and warm, with creaky wood floors and a back porch that caught the sunset just right. She painted the walls soft colors: sage green, dusty blue, warm beige. She filled the rooms with plants she learned to nurture with the same patience she was now learning to offer herself. She found a battered leather armchair at a secondhand store and placed it near the window, perfect for reading or simply staring into the fading light with a heart that, day by day, grew lighter. Emily took a job dispatching for a local trucking company, far removed from the chaos of classrooms and the ghosts of old routines. It was steady work, predictable hours, no unexpected absences, no last-minute emergencies. Just the quiet comfort of schedules and radio calls, and the knowledge that at the end of each day, she would drive home to a place that was entirely her own. Max adapted quickly to their new life, his tail wagging with renewed vigor as he chased lizards across the dusty backyard and napped lazily in patches of sun. His simple joy anchored Emily on days when the grief still whispered at the edges of her mind. Because grief didn't disappear. It lingered, subtle and insistent, weaving itself into unexpected moments. A song on the radio, the way a stranger's laugh reminded her of Ryan's once genuine grin. But the grief no longer ruled her. It had become a part of the landscape, like the ancient stones that dotted Sedona's hills, worn, weathered, beautiful in their resilience. Emily didn't rush to fill the empty spaces Ryan had left behind. She learned to sit with them, to let loneliness visit without inviting it to stay. She hiked the red trails at sunrise, feeling the earth strong beneath her feet, her lungs filling with air that tasted of dust and freedom. She spent long afternoons in quiet cafes, sipping coffee and sketching in worn notebooks she had once abandoned in closets and drawers. She reconnected with herself, not through grand gestures or sweeping transformations, but through small, deliberate acts of kindness toward her own soul. There were new faces, too. She joined a local hiking club, its members a patchwork of wanderers, retirees, and kindred spirits. There was laughter again, tentative at first, then stronger. There were evenings spent around campfires, stories traded beneath stars older than memory itself. One of those faces belonged to Jack, a fellow hiker who loved the outdoors as much as she did. Jack, with his quiet humor and kind eyes that asked nothing of her except authenticity. There was no rush between them, no burning. Need to define anything too soon. Emily wasn't looking for rescue anymore. She wasn't looking to be completed. She was looking for companionship, for shared silences, for someone who understood that love, real love, was not possession, but presence. Jack understood. On a cool autumn evening, sitting side by side on the back porch, watching the sun bleed into the red rocks, Emily realized she was no longer surviving. She was living. There were scars, of course, invisible ones etched deep into the fabric of who she was. But they no longer felt like weaknesses. They felt like medals, proof that she had fought her way through hell and made it back stronger. A second chance. Emily Carter's story was no longer about betrayal or loss. It was about rising, about rebuilding, about choosing herself every single day in a world that had once tried to convince her she wasn't enough. And as she stood at the edge of her porch, the vast desert sprawling out before her like an unwritten book, she smiled, a real, unguarded smile, and took a breath that tasted of dust, sunlight, and endless possibilities. The past was a place she had survived. The future was a place she would thrive. And this time, the story was hers alone to write. When Emily Carter first lay unconscious in a hospital bed in Boulder, Colorado, she could never have imagined that the life she trusted, the marriage she had built over 12 years, was disintegrating piece by piece. As her body struggled to heal, her husband, Ryan Carter, was plotting a very different kind of escape. In the dead of night, while Emily was most vulnerable, Ryan drained their life savings, wiped their financial future clean, and left Emily with nothing but a cold text message and an empty account. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound. Ryan had not simply abandoned her. He had stripped away every illusion of safety, loyalty, and love. But what he failed to understand was that Emily Carter was not a woman easily broken. Betrayal did not shatter her spirit, it sharpened it. What began as devastation quietly hardened into resolve. Instead of responding with rage or reckless retaliation, Emily chose a path of silent strength. She gathered evidence, built her case brick by brick, and moved with a precision Ryan never saw coming. She played the long game, the smart game, and when she finally faced him in court, it was not as the broken woman he had imagined, but as the architect of his downfall. Emily's calm but devastating presentation of facts left Ryan exposed, not just as a cheating husband, but as a man who had preyed upon his wife's trust during her most vulnerable moments. The court recognized the magnitude of his betrayal, awarding Emily not only financial restitution, but the dignity of seeing justice served. Yet Emily's true triumph did not unfold in the sterile walls of a courtroom. It happened later, quietly, far from the eyes of those who had wronged her. It happened when she sold the house that held too many ghosts and bought herself a new home in the vast, healing deserts of Sedona. It happened when she traded in the noise of betrayal for the serenity of long hikes, new friendships, and rediscovering a version of herself that didn't have to shrink to fit someone else's shadow. The woman who had once measured her worth by another's approval learned to stand in her own light. She did not rush into a new life fueled by anger. She built it slowly, carefully, lovingly. Emily Carter's story is not one of revenge. It is a story of reclamation, of resilience, of rebirth. The lesson here is as clear as it is profound. When life shatters around you, you have a choice. You can sit among the wreckage, mourning the pieces of what once was, or you can gather the strongest shards, forge something new, and rise stronger than before. In a world that sometimes glamorizes quick vengeance or bitter endings, Emily teaches us that the most powerful response to betrayal is not retaliation. It is elevation. It is living a life so full, so grounded, and so whole that the people who tried to destroy you become irrelevant to your future. Her story reminds us that trust is a beautiful but fragile gift. That love must be mutual, not transactional. That betrayal, while painful, can be the fire that forges you into a more authentic, resilient version of yourself. And perhaps most importantly, it teaches us that healing is not something that happens by accident. It is a choice you make every single day. Applied to our own lives, Emily's journey urges us to be vigilant with our hearts and wise with our trust. It reminds us that even the deepest wounds do not define us. It is how we choose to heal that writes our true story. No matter how complete the betrayal or how devastating the loss, there is always a way forward. It may not be easy. It may not be quick, but it is possible, and it is worth it. Now, a quick question for you. If you found yourself in Emily's situation, what would you focus on first? A. Confronting the person who betrayed you immediately. B. Quietly gathering evidence and building a strong case before taking any action. Comment your answer below, A or B, and let's hear your thoughts. We would also love to know. What lessons do you personally take away from Emily's story? How would you apply them to your own life or relationships? Share your insights in the comments so that others can learn from your experiences too. Finally, if you found Emily's journey inspiring and want more real, powerful stories like this one, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world to us and motivates us to keep bringing you the best, most inspiring content. Stay tuned for the next incredible story that might just change the way you see your own life. Thank you for being here, and remember, sometimes the end of a chapter is just the beginning of your greatest story.